Okay, so we're recording, and here we are again. And we were already up and running before we hit record, but we were talking about, well, in a sense, about computer games and virtual worlds, really, weren't we? The way that I guess people who are game designers or people who build games, whether they be imagination games or computer graphic-driven games, they talk about world building. And I've always thought that was a fascinating overlay to the therapeutic project, that there's a relationship between world building and, being a person, growing a psyche, moving through the world, making choices. But also, we were specifically talking about the fabric of virtual worlds. So we were using the game Assassin's Creed, or the sequence of games there as an example, because they've re-engineered and built in virtual space a variety of ancient cities and locations in which you can, as a sort of sandbox, as they say, just move around and interact and play and follow missions and quests and side quests. And I have noticed, simply by kind of following people on Twitter, that there are notable historians who maybe don't enjoy the gameplay of such things particularly, but do these things simply to have the immersive experience of wandering around in, 14th century Venice, or ancient Alexandria, or Renaissance Florence, or whatever it might be. And you can blame them. It's a fascinating thing that is suddenly conceptually accessible if you can buy the hardware, and if you don't have a kind of epileptic reaction to the graphic aspect of the thing. But those things notwithstanding, it's just there to be played with. And you were sharing about the way it showed up in a piece of work with a particular client.
Yeah, while exchanging some ideas around that, I just remember that 7 years ago, I'm having a hard time remembering when, but probably 6 or 7 years ago, I was working with a boy who was in first grade, extremely gifted in mathematics. But of course, as with every educational system, when you're either extremely gifted or under gifted, as they sometimes, the system will just spit you out because you just don't fit. Yeah. And just imagine a boy who's able to calculate some square root equations just like that, without even making any effort about that. And at school, they asked him, how can you make sense of 2 + 2? What does that equal? And he's like, sorry, that's not my thing. I've overexceeded that. And he was enjoying the opportunity of this one specific game, Assassin's Creed, where you embody, I think it's a fictional character. I'm not sure if the person, the specific character, is a proper human being existing in history, probably invented by someone's imagination. And he said, well, I'm being this, I'll probably remember the name, Ezio or Ezio someone, who is meeting historical figures, famous ones like Leonardo da Vinci, and exchanging some ideas with them that serve as hidden history. So you play the game, you move in through proper cities. You're seeing 14th century Venice or 13th century Naples or whatever. Really a copy-paste version of them, just with preserved medieval structures or things that are maybe you cannot find these days, but they've seen probably paintings or architectural plans, and they've rebuilt them virtually. And the boy just told me, listen, now, until you play the game, we don't have anything to talk about right now. And as I was mentioning, probably under different circumstances and under different therapeutic conditions, this would have been considered a very, very solid, massive acting out that I did and that he did. And we were really enacting some kind of scenario. But
Yes.
I agreed, and I said, well, I don't have a PlayStation, and I'm not planning on buying one. He said, I will give you mine for a week until our next meeting. So please play the game, and then we'll probably talk about that, and we'll
Yeah.
continue. A sort of a rite of passage, even sort of a test on how loyal will I be to
Yeah.
that boy's interest or whatever's going on there.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah.
And he got a plastic bag from the supermarket, and everything was really stuffed in, like, cables all over the place. So I untangled that package of cables and everything at home, and I played. And this really is, as they call these days, immersive experience.
Yeah.
Because that wording became a cliche, but it really is
Yes.
immersive experience, quite literally.
Yeah.
Because you play, and the thin line between your own character and the character that's on the screen just fades away at different times, then gets thickened back
Yes.
by probably the developers, not to lose the sense of reality or anything.
Yes.
And I think that's quite useful, but I can see how this can be quite dangerous sometimes with some people,
Yes.
thinning that line.
Yeah.
But just being immersed culturally in Italian culture for all my life, I know several Italian cities by hand, and I've compared some. For example, I have this favorite piazza in Florence, and
Yes.
I've walked with the character inside the game to that specific place. And it's the same, just always historically, but
Yes.
accurate. And to see that from the premises of your own home, just sitting in front of your TV, and to reach Florence, you need to travel. Well, not that long really, but the effort, the journey of traveling there takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
Just to reach there and to stay there and to take in all the information and all the experience. And this is done just by pressing a button and then walking through with the joystick your character to this place. You're seeing very weird experience.
Yeah.
Very weird.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you come at it with that layering of knowledge that was already there, it adds another dimension again. I guess you could play it just as a game backdrop and not relate to it on that level at all. But if you do relate to it on that level, you've discovered that actually, it was built with that awareness. It's not just slapped together. It's not just a few pixels and blocks lumped in. It's rendered very accurately and probably based on digital scans and all of the stuff that they use these days to kind of digitize three-dimensional mapping of space. And then you can do anything with it. You can locate it anywhere. It makes me think there's a very well known, we used to play with it a lot, just a video, but you can sort of, it's to illustrate scale. So it's a kind of thing for kids based on the scale of things that exist. So it starts at the kind of human level, and you can pull the micro or the macro focus of it, and that becomes a kind of video moving backwards or moving forwards. And if you go from the human, you start to pull it towards the larger, and you go up to a blue whale or some kind of dinosaur and various things like this, and then suddenly you're into like the largest living organisms, and then what does it go to next? There's I think the planet Mercury and the moon become units, and it's giving you a scale along the side the whole time. And then it uses Pluto, and it uses the state of Texas at one point as a unit of measurement. But at one point, quite far into that process, it has the world of Minecraft, which is substantially bigger than the Earth actually is itself. It's the kind of virtual space that is described and mapped in the game Minecraft is bigger than planetary scale. Which I remember the first time I saw that, it left me scratching my head. It's like, this is a thing that doesn't exist other than on pixels in computer screens and, you know, server
Mm-hmm.
farms around the place. But if it did exist in a reality space rather than a digitized reality space, it couldn't be on Earth because it's too big.
Yeah,
It's
it couldn't exist
expanded
here.
and expanded. Yeah, it's really an interesting thing. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called. I'll look it up and put it in the notes. This little video. It's as long or as short as you like, because you can just keep pausing at the different scales, right the way down to beyond kind of abyssal nothing, where fragments of particles have kind of blinked out of existence.
Just saying Minecraft, I always treated that game
Yeah,
not only as a game, really.
yeah.
Uh, but there's something very important about the development and the popularization of that thing. Because up until one point there was the widespread rumor or the widespread threatening idea that kids playing violent games with shooting and will make them aggressive, which is not the case at all, of course. But this has to exist under very specific circumstances. You know, for one kid to copy, for example, punching someone else or shooting at someone else.
Yeah.
And at one point there was strategy games, and Minecraft just appeared to be some kind of utopia. Gave kids and not only the ability to build or to create, and gave adults the ability to calm themselves down and say, "Ooh, we have something else." Something else came out of nowhere, and this is perfect. Our kids will develop as creators, not destroyers. And we can breathe. Thank God.
Yeah.
Connecting everything together. So there's something very important about that.
Yes, agreed. And it just reminds me of a story that was in the press a couple of weeks ago here in the UK. Don't know if it kind of figured anywhere else, but there was a guy who I think is some kind of archaeologist or a professor of archaeology in one of the Manchester universities, but lives in North Wales, and there he was in lockdown like everybody else with his daughter, who was sort of 9 or 10, I think. And he had the I can empathize the dilemma of having to homeschool and all of that. And somewhere along the line, as many of us did, became very bored and frustrated with the work that was being given, or just couldn't do any more of that for whatever reason, and decided let's have our own project. Let's do something together. One thing I love, one thing you love, let's put them together. And so his thing was archaeology and her thing was Minecraft. And they built to scale in Minecraft. There's a burial chamber, a chambered tomb kind of thing in Anglesey in North Wales, called Bryn Celli Ddu, which is I think early Bronze Age structure that was like reused. I've been there. It's pretty spectacular, kind of domed, built into the ground, just in a field these days, surrounded by cows. But there it is, this ancient monument. And this was one of the things he'd been studying, and he had, before the lockdown, been engaged in a mapping exercise of the thing. So he had the kit with all those laser scanners, and he'd made a kind of line model from all the data points that the thing gathers. And so he figured a way to extract that data, and then they could use it in Minecraft. So they rebuilt Bryn Celli Ddu in Minecraft properly to scale. I think Minecraft nominally works on 1 meter square blocks. I think that's the kind of metric that the game uses. And he was like, well, we can I could make the resolution more than that, but 1 meter is brilliant. We can do that. So they actually made the geology of the landscape around it, the whole kind of bedrock, the sea level, the relative heights of mountains, and just oriented the entire thing in a landscape. And then kind of extrapolated how would this place have been used. So they they inhabited it with characters that could move through it and maybe light a fire by there, or no, the fire should be here. Tried it in different
Mhm.
weather conditions, and yeah, really just a great, remarkable, playful, but also rather like the Assassin's Creed stuff. It's not just frivolous play because it's
Yeah.
specifically calibrated to to observe data and reality. And I don't know, it's just a really interesting intersection between
Mhm, mhm.
parts of the human being. I'll try and
Yeah, but
find a link for that. It's a good story.
yeah, that would be great to see. Well, look, I just got reminded of this is there's something. um, I'm not sure if it's archetypal in that
Yeah.
process, but along human history, there are human desires that repeat themselves, uh, and they almost always correspond to the exact same equation, just some element changes slightly. Of
Yeah.
course, the outcome changes dramatically when these small things change. But in its core, every human desire, being archetypal, personal, or transpersonal,
Mm.
it's remains the same. And one of them is to establish a link between the virtual and the real.
Mm. Mm.
And not only establishing a link, but to transfer one inside the other,
Yes.
and probably vice versa, something like just building the pyramids and calculating the coordinates, and this corresponds to the speed of light for the Great Pyramid of
Mm.
Giza.
Mm.
And then doing some kind of a maze inside of them, which corresponds to the soul's journey to reach something. And up until this day, they
Yes.
cannot solve the riddle of that with drones, with cameras, with whatever.
Yes.
It's still unsolvable. And then you have the uh, medieval period, where it's the so-called Dark Ages, corresponds to the darkness inside of people,
Yeah.
not outside.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed.
So dragons and magic, and that's also embedded
Yes.
somewhere there within us. And
Yeah.
I think that's the very beautiful thing that in today's version of that, in today's equation.
Mm.
it, we, to me, it looks like we're trying to transfer more
Mm.
than it's transferable, really, and
Yes.
that poses a problem.
Yeah.
Let's code the brain
Mm.
into computer code,
Yeah.
and see if we can build a hardware for it to function properly.
Yeah.
And if someone, I've seen an interview with Elon Musk, who says that
Mm.
people
Mm.
that do not believe some artificial intelligence codes can be smarter than the human being, these people are stupid. Or Bill Gates told the press 17 years ago, I believe, that in 10 years he will have a proper artificial brain.
Mm.
He already, stepped over that threshold that he built for himself. We don't have the brain yet. But I think there's something very childish in terms of dynamic.
Yes. Yes.
We're doing a very proper job in coding different things
Yes.
and inventing things, but it's like baby geniuses playing.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You construct it, and out of the euphoria that you've reached God, you're trying to get God by the throat and say, "Ha I've reached your level.
Yeah.
Now come down the throne.
I
I
won.
want to climb you."
Yeah.
Yeah, and the baby genius doesn't really realize that it's holding another baby genius by the
Yes.
throat. And that probably causes wars, that causes
Yeah.
threats, that causes
Yeah.
different fractions.
That's a
And
very
I
good
think
point.
Sam Harris said something that I loved way harder than I should have laughed at that. And then I realized this is almost words of some kind of genius within him. That in 100 or 200 years time, people fighting over Windows 98 or Mac OS 12 will look ridiculous probably, but will reach them.
Yeah,
And that's quite a thing. So
yeah.
yeah.
It's like yeah, Protestant Reformation or something, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So, but
Yeah.
what sense do you make of that? Of people
Well,
trying to.
my natural position is to be very skeptical and cynical about technology in that regard. I mean, I can't help but think, we were talking before we started recording, that I just recently bought one of these VR headset devices, an Oculus Quest, which is an amazing piece of kit, frankly. There's no denying that. It's astonishing, and there's all kinds of very interesting things that one can apply it to. It it's like being in the presence of some kind of deity, because the power to generate or be the vehicle through which the generation of worlds happens is enormous. And of course, it's unearned. If you can pay the money, you can have this. So it's not like you've passed any kind of threshold of genius or initiatory realization to earn it and participate in it. It's just a consumer aspect, which is very easy to forget. You can very easily inflate and become this narcissistic demigod. Yeah, it's a kind of realm, I think. It's a bit like the kind of asuras in Hindu thinking, these kind of slightly demonic, immortal beings that aren't completely enlightened but inhabit these mid realms. Or in the Buddhist tradition, there are kind of equivalents to the kind of heaven realms. It's very much like that, and it makes me think of Star Trek. It feels like the making real of the kind of holodeck experience, which at one level, what's not to like? It's a fantastic, free, consequence-free play zone for unbridled imagination. Of course, it isn't that at all. It's predicated on the technology and the constraints and who holds the power within it. So, giving the example of watching one of these, I think it was NASA ultimately, documentary that you can watch in 3D of. It's a kind of biography of the planet Mars, really, in like 25 minutes. And it's very good, and it's visually stunning. You can move through Olympus Mons and down the great canyons that are, bigger than Europe, and all of this. And it's overwhelmingly, it's very beautiful in lots of ways. But of course, it ends with a very Elon Musk vision of Mars populated by humans living in these kind of neat capsules and basically engaging in the early stages of terraforming Mars. So you just know there's an agenda involved. You're aligning yourself, or being invited to align yourself with that project, technologically speaking. So it made me revisit people like John Zerzan, who's a great big critic of technology in general and the uses it's put to. I guess he's often thought of as a primitivist, which I wouldn't subscribe to that view, but he's quite an interesting lens through which to study some of these things. So I guess I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm also thinking pragmatically. These things exist. They're already used in therapeutic modes. I'm aware of research where they've used VR headsets with people with PTSD to do levels of exposure to, whether it's explosions or whether it's particular soundscapes, or putting someone back in that market in Baghdad where the bomb went off, or whatever it is, in a graded way. So there's that. They used a lot with dementia and or with pre-dementia, with people who've lost mobility or who've just reached an age where they think their hardware is not working in the way it was designed to. So I think it's complicated, and it's too early to know for me. The kid in me is absolutely, and I think this is not an insignificant point, is in awe. I think it's important that we have the experience of being awed by things, or by being in effect in the presence of magic. I'm never going to understand how this piece of kit works. It in effect becomes like what game designers usually call a MacGuffin, a kind of magical component, Deus ex machina kind of thing, really. It's just, except this one is virtual and real, so that, yeah. I can say it affected dream. I definitely noticed that I had more dreams that were more like three-dimensional VR space,
Mhm.
having first used the thing. Yeah, yeah. I mean, dreams can do that anyway, of course, but it
Yeah.
did not feel entirely coincidental that there was a
Well, no,
succession. Yeah,
but that's a very powerful impact,
yeah.
to have used that
Felt
for
like,
a while, not that long, and then
yeah,
have an immediate impact on how.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, my fear would be that, we all end up on these headsets, isolated from one another in biosecure bubbles, never actually going to Florence or never actually going to the beach or,
Yeah.
getting in a canoe and kayaking around that coastline, but doing it all in this virtual space. And of course, that would involve a tremendous amount of loss. That's not
I mean,
just an
yeah.
upside. But yeah, I'm certain that in terms of my own decision making, which I could deflect and say I was doing on behalf of my son, but of course it involved me too. This
Mm.
was part of a reaction to lockdown, a sense of, oh, we're not actually physically going anywhere and we can't go to that museum, but you can walk around that museum in virtual reality and pick up those artifacts and study them and put them down and look at those pieces of art on the wall in great detail. Yeah, and so it is. It delivers on that score. Mm. But I'll
Well,
keep checking in about that because it's
yeah.
what it shouldn't become is kind of taken for granted, lazy acceptance of just, oh yeah, there's that. It yeah, it ought to occupy, it seems to me, a provoking place and a questioning place. Yeah.
Mm. Well, because you mentioned consumerism as a kind of a reflex that we all have these days, because everything around us is,
Yeah.
well, almost everything is constructed
Mm.
according to that rule of consumerism. But I think there's a very how can I put it into it? We all forget, or from time to time forget, because we have to forget that the ability to communicate between the inner and the outer world, not that they are really different, but
Yeah.
they have some differences. The ability to communicate between those,
Yes.
namely perception or some kind of
Yeah.
functioning executive in neuropsychological terms. This is so complex of a task for the whole being
Yes.
and for the whole social system that um, we take it for granted in the same
Yes.
consumeristic way.
Yes.
And I'll give an example. Um, I was going to one of the coffee shops here next to my office the other day, and I wanted to buy coffee, and uh, I'm getting in. I'm putting on my mask.
Yeah.
But there's only one person to enter the shop.
Ah.
Switch. And the lady that was on the counter asked me, "But what kind of coffee do you want?" And I said, well, a very short espresso with a couple of splashes of milk, please. And she started asking me questions. What kind of milk do you want? Hot or cold? Do you want this to be almond or coconut or whatever milk? Do you want the coffee to be, what kind of roast do you want out of 10? And what kind of intensity do you want out of 10? And I, I was really engaged in that kind of interplay. It was almost like flirting, but
Yeah.
on contemporary level.
Yeah.
He's asking questions, and I'm the one to decide, and this is all very empowering
Yeah.
to a certain point. But I completely forgot about the coffee. I forgot about the craving of the taste I wanted to have in my mouth, and this very energizing feeling that I get from it.
Yeah.
And started really focusing on all the different aspects of how will I get my coffee
Yes.
to be delivered and served. Even there was one question: do you want a plain plastic cup? But bear in mind, this is not very eco-friendly, so you should pick this carton white one, and so on. So I was having this urge from the inside to say, please, coffee, proper one, whatever you decide, and cow's titty milk, something like that, probably. Just plain and simple. And I was doing this analogy with how we forget about how the mind works.
Yeah.
And these days, there's the new age approach to it, which I don't particularly like. But people sometimes say, just listen. And that might be in some kind of angry position, of course. Just listen. Different variations around that.
Yeah, indeed.
But if we extract the aggressive component out of that and make it not an exclamation, but just a purely but on its symbolical level, just listen.
Yeah.
That's very, very, very hard when you focus on it, but you have all the equipment to do it immediately. So you enter the Florence Cathedral without going there, and you have the ability to just listen without focusing on just listening on that thing. And it's a parallel there's a quantum effect probably.
Yes.
Because if you try to observe it, it runs away, and you can observe its effects around it. Probably. Yeah. But when you trust it, it unfolds naturally.
Yes.
And I think this has to do something similar with technology as we're speaking.
Yeah, I think that's deeply true. Making me think of some of Peter Kingsley's observations about how everything that we see around us in the technological, or what some would call the technosphere, is there from the very beginning, the very first moments of this culture arising. That it's all born in ecstasy, as you would say, immediately. It's all implied and just has to be unfolded in time. And that what you just described is what underwrites it, the capacity to be fully engaged with one's senses whilst recognizing our engagement with one's senses. So never being eluded in that way, which is almost so subtle as to be almost impossible. Hence the practices of lying down and dying, as he would say. You just lie down, close your eyes and die. That's the dark places which we keep returning to. I notice we were always talking about caves or tombs or internal chambers and spaces. That just is part of how these conversations want to happen. They returning to that, the things that are more conducive to that experience. Yeah, really, really fascinating. Wow, wasn't expecting I'm never expecting what we're going to talk about. That's the whole point. But it's fascinating to have that kind of tour of technology and its impact on psyche, you might say, or psyche's impact on technology. It's clearly mutual. Well, and they do say, I have no idea how true this is or whether this is just kind of urban myth stuff, but they do say that Star Trek technology, which obviously didn't exist at the time they were filming, particularly the original series of Star Trek, it almost front loads the culture to have to then invent that thing. So doors that just go when you walk towards them, with people pulling them open. But actually, of course, you then go and invent the actual technology to do that. And I suppose this got talked about a bit when 3D printers first appeared, that these are Star Trek replicators was the big cry. Of course they're not, but they're not nothing. They're on that continuum of you can 3D print buildings, can't you, or cakes, or very, very precise kind of shapes that become valve functions in the heart, or again we're talking about scale in there. yeah, 3D print a new bridge to place across that fallen one in a crisis. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, but I won't be able to remember the full story behind those two things that I just got reminded of. That the idea of the robot actually appeared in a novel, and the idea of the machine gun firstly appeared in a painting of a Russian painter that I just completely forgot the name of. But
Yeah.
I think the painting was around 1830 something, that no one probably had the, or even 17 something.
Yeah.
So this is 18th century, let's say.
Yeah.
And no, they probably fantasized about, can I have something that will spare me the effort of bringing every single shot from my barreled gun, down to reload, and that's making me slower, and I want to kill people faster, which is probably the intent. And then someone invented a fantasy idea of this thing. The painting itself, it's some kind of demolished building that's in flames, and you can see the machine gun's silhouette peeking from one end of this thing, and it's unquestionably a machine gun. But when you see that the year that this painting was finished, just boggles the mind. The concept.
So it becomes visionary rather than documentary. Yeah. Oh, that's really strange. I didn't know anything about that. That's making me want to see the image.
I will research that. I'm sure.
Well, I'll confess as to why it's. I mean, it would be interesting no matter what. But I've just been. It feels, just what you're saying there feels like it's almost prescient, not just of the machine gun, but quite specifically of ruined Russian cities and machine guns. It being a Russian painting, and I mean that's fresh in my mind. I've been one of the late lockdown things I got into was finally getting around to looking at Vassily Grossman's novel Life and Fate, which is a huge sort of 800-page undertaking in English. I don't know how long it is in Russian, but I discovered there was a TV adaptation of it made in 2012 by one of the Russian state TV companies. And it's obviously like any adaptation of a huge novel like that. They've simplified the storytelling because they've had to, because it's got hundreds of characters. There's no way you could pull that off unless you had an endless amount of time. But they made this 12-episode version of it where they slightly, I believe, kind of amalgamated certain characters and brought others to the fore a little bit more, told the story from their perspective a bit more. But it was superb. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who've criticized it for all kinds of reasons, but just purely as a naive viewer, an interested and engaged naive viewer, it really caught my attention and my awareness. And a big chunk, in fact, the main, you could argue, character of that novel is Stalingrad, and the whole in real time happening as the novel proceeds, battle of and for Stalingrad, as these two kind of ideologies kind of wrestle one another to a standstill, and then one eventually prevails, and what that does to the characters who live through it, either physically present in the battles or wounded and taken from the front, or living in quite a lot of them end up in Moscow. Really, really fascinating. And I mean, it's a subject you could talk about for hours because it's such a profound, enlightening, kind of illuminating look at totalitarian systems meeting and what they do to one another and how they mimic and replicate one another. Oh, we've frozen.
Something happened.
Yeah, something happened. Can you still hear me, Martin?
Yeah, perfect.
I can hear you too. There we are. We're back. The
Yeah.
visuals seem to get frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can't handle us talking about. I mean, there are people who claim Life and Fate to be one of the two great novels of the 20th century. The other one being The Leopard, the Sicilian
Mm-hmm.
novel,
Yeah.
which I've also read and is also very, very good. I mean, I don't know about that. I've never found it very useful to kind of put things in ranking lists, but it's certainly a thing to be reckoned with, and it feels deeply relevant. Partly why I got back into reading and then watching it, because of how it deconstructs the systems that grow up around these kind of ideological beliefs, but how they're completely informed by human characteristics and nature. So, yeah, I won't plot spoiler it for anyone too much, but one of the main characters is a physicist, and he's a kind of, you could say a sort of avatar for the author, for Vassily Grossman, who, is kind of author and writer and journalist, and very, very accomplished writer. But he puts himself forward as a scientist in this story, and he's continually falling out with people and getting stroppy and wrestling with his own failure and his own inability to express and articulate his theoretical vision. And then his theory comes together in this vision, and he states it, and he's delighted, and everyone's really into the idea because they know they can use it to advance the physics, basically, of racing towards nuclear fission and understanding. And then on a whim, it becomes the case that all these other scientists at the academy start to condemn his theory as being too at odds with the proper socialist understanding of materialism. It's too metaphysical, or it's not obeying the strict Stalinist interpretation of nature. And on the back of that arbitrary view, all of these machinations take place that see him basically ousted and in a very perilous, about to be sent to the gulag, basically. That's the kind of inference of the thing. And then out of nowhere, well, I am just going to spoiler it, aren't I? Out of nowhere, Stalin intervenes, presumably based on total pragmatic, this work might get somewhere, we need this. So he suddenly goes from outcast to, my God, he had a phone call from the great leader. Everybody must bow before his will. And then it turns again. There's another iteration of the thing where he's then invited to sign a letter condemning lots of other scientists who had previously had the upper hand on him. And he's at odds with himself all over again, because he knows morally and ethically and in the fabric of his being, this is something he cannot in all good conscience do. But he comes to this reckoning of, I don't have the strength to resist anymore. I just need to get on with my work and just sign this and go away and leave me to it. And it's so well done, and it's so tellingly human. It's a very, very accomplished piece of work, and really interesting in the way that these things eat themselves. So various, incredibly orthodox, strictly observed, shining communist examples who rise to high rank as commissars in the kind of shadow military, as it were, end up suddenly being arbitrarily imprisoned and having no idea why, and being asked questions like, well, you were imprisoned under the Tsarist regime. Is this harder than that or easier than that? These kind of impossible reckonings. You're like, well, actually, it was easier then because I actually knew why I was in prison. Whereas under this, do I just look the wrong way today? Or it's utterly arbitrary. So I recommend it as a watch or a listen. The watch in particular, I think, is a very good distilled essence of the thing to get one. Easier to find sort of 10 hours of TV watching than multiple tens of hours or hundreds of hours of reading the novel.
Yeah. Well, but I suppose these kind of readings or really watching the adaptations,
yes,
they do require a very specific state of being right now, at the moment of reading and watching, just because the
Yeah.
uh, I do believe that there's a thing that we might call fake reading or
Yeah.
artificial reading. You just go through the pages, and we've all done that. And I think even in the most attuned
Yeah.
form of our perception to a novel, for example, from time to time, from page to page, we all do this
Yeah.
superficial, let's say, reading. But in order to reach the not superficial one, this
Yeah.
requires a great psychological stamina, even just seeing the relevance of events
Yes.
embedded in the novel and compared to today's events of any sort. And I think people have intuition around that. For example, seeing Trump in the White House and then reading something about Stalin.
Yeah.
Um, Stalin wasn't stupid, of course.
Yeah.
This might
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
But the intuitive idea that there's someone up there that regulates everything
Yeah.
according to his own will,
Yeah.
this seeing the tragedy that we live in on
Yes.
some level of existence, this requires the stamina, I believe.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
uh,
And like any really great novel, that's, I mean, particularly Russian novels, frankly, I mean, they really seem to elevate the form, to me anyway. That maybe that's an aesthetic taste, I don't know, but because they locate the story in the vastness somehow, you know, whether it's Tolstoy or whether it's Vassily Grossman or whether it's Dostoevsky or whether it's Chekhov, or, you know, it manages to do the scale thing, to pull the scale back and forth between the infinitely human and personal and interpersonal dynamics of two people or a family cluster, and then into these sort of systemic things across time, and then into, I don't know what the Russian conception of that would be, but the kind of fate of the people, you might say. The yeah, that kind of thing that's difficult to articulate, certainly in English, about motherland, fatherland, the kind of belonging to a place, and the way it informs everything about your understanding of your place in the cosmos, really, and is underwritten by belonging. Yeah, just does that extremely well. Uh, hmm. And yeah, just has something to say that isn't easy at all those levels. Hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
So yeah.
I've seen a. It's one of those fun pictures along the internet that they have a great sense of humor sometimes, but when you try to see past the
Yeah.
sense of humor, something
Yeah.
inherently truthful about that.
Mm.
I've seen this picture of a very buff guy, someone that's probably been working out all their
Yeah.
lives. He's doing those poses
Yeah.
that professional
Yeah.
bodybuilders do when they go on a contest, and it says Albert Camus on his, and probably the reference of absurdism and how powerful that was. But then the next panel is the camera zoomed out,
Yeah.
and behind that person, there's a huge monster, something that resembles some half wolf, half human, something with like a centaur
Yeah.
body, uh, 10, 15 times bigger than that.
Yeah.
And with a grim face that just probably says, I will crush you. And on its forehead says Russian realism. So just a comparison between those things, the vastness.
Dear.
And I think that this vastness of the perception in Russian literature and cinema even, and poetry,
Yeah.
when we are not in the state of mind to hug the huge mother Russia,
Yeah.
and to dance with it, this probably can be experienced as something crushing,
Yeah.
something devastating, something
Yeah.
tearing you to pieces even sometimes.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Fascinating. Very fascinating. I feel very ill prepared for a deeper conversation about that because it's so vast. Just
It
yeah,
is, it
you
is.
have to just stand in the kind of small position in relation to it. I have started reading. There's an English historian who's pretty good. He had a number of TV presentations of TV histories. A guy called Simon Sebag Montefiore, which is quite a good name. He did a very good history of Spain, a kind of condensed 3-episode, the story of Spain, basically. But in his written work, one of his sort of standout books is about Stalin. He spent a long time just living with Stalin in the way that historians do. And I think the book is called In the Court of the Red Tsar. And yeah, I've just read the first handful of chapters, which it's not told chronologically. It's kind of full of flashbacks, and the story moves back and forth quite a lot. But it's compelling. It's riveting. The intensity and the sheer scale of the paranoia is eye-watering. Yeah, yeah. It begins on the night that the history begins on the night that Stalin's wife kills herself. Except you don't, you're not to know that's what's going to happen yet. But there it is unfolding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a man who said to one of his sons, who had been kind of throwing his weight around with others in the lower orders of the party and using the name Stalin. It's like, you're not Stalin. Even I'm not really Stalin, except when I try my hardest. But you're definitely not Stalin. You're just the son of Stalin, and that's nothing. You don't earn this right. He had another of his sons executed, I think. Astonishing. And yet, in a tradition, it's not unprecedented. You can see, it's an anomalous revisiting of, precursor events. Rather like the machine gun poking out in the painting you were describing, that's yet to be invented, but it's there anyway. It's implied. Yeah.
Yes. I'm quite aware that throughout history, many of the legendary mystics or psychologists or whomever, they will try to do some kind of profiles or portrayals of dictatorship and the people that are willing that.
Yes.
I'm not sure that's quite successful. I really don't like reading these things.
Yes.
Because they seem like a snapshot of someone's own state of being at the moment compared to the other person's state of being at the moment. And this can be valid for 30 or 40 seconds until they've written that. So everything changed afterwards.
Yeah, very good point.
Just thinking about all the people wielding great power and just picking up Stalin, even his name is not Stalin. I'm just getting reminded of that.
Yes.
That he himself, or probably under circumstances that I'm not aware of, but he substituted his name of Yosef Vissarionovich.
Yes.
The corresponding Russian word for steel.
Yes.
So, and back then, in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution of several ages after that, the steel was a very alchemical way of expressing something immovable, something very robust and very destructive if molded into the right shape.
Yeah.
Or if heated up, preserving heat for a huge amount of time, not melting, not being able to compress itself due to outer conditions, and so on and so on. And just the sheer amount of personality work there.
Yes.
That's Stalin did for himself, probably.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's huge. Yeah. And you can see, again, like you said before, something of an archetypal trace in that it's whether it's following the kind of Stalin arc of things, taking the kind of red left communist arc, or whether it's the kind of fascist or even Nazi arc, it's doing the same alchemical work to create. Everyone is obsessed with concrete and steel. That's what those regimes are all about. It's all in material terms about how good is your steel, how good is your concrete. And it turns out that the Russian capacity to generate that ends up being greater than the kind of Axis powers capacity to generate that. So the story in the kind of Axis arc is of the steels getting of lesser quality as the decade goes on, as the war goes on, and the concrete, well, definitely it starts off kind of world beating, no one's seen the like since the Romans, and it ends up with just, you know, handfuls of sand and gravel off a beach lumped together to try and make a makeshift bunker. Well, and I guess we should also include then you've got the American steel and concrete equivalent happening in back to the commodification and the corporate or capitalist kind of mobilization of that too, which is often missed out of the story, even though it's arguably the real victor of the entire thing. The totalitarian aspects alchemically fuse and fight themselves to a standstill, or become kind of enmeshed. And yeah, the figures. I was reading something the other day about the growth of the American Navy, and in particular the merchant Navy, during the Second World War years. And for the Americans, that's 41 to 45, rather than, you know, if you asked a Chinese person, they'd say, you know, 1936 to 1945 is the Second World War. So it's not even fixed in that way. But if you just say roughly a decade, I mean, it's astonishing. Building hundreds of ships a week at one point, having not been doing that prior to this event. And that's all the triumphant mobilization of the steel capacity, you could say. Really. I was going to say riveting. No pun intended. Yeah.
Well, that just reminds me of. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have found that, because there's no such thing as finding something first. But I've observed that, let's say, phenomenon. If someone wants to explore history, if someone wants to belong to a certain political party, or just have political understanding on why and how something is governed, or if someone wants to have economical background in terms of the science of economics, there's main two ways how people do it, and I've seen that with my clients for those years that I've been working. One way is to jump directly at the either history, either politics, either economy, or but this doesn't seem to be very efficient. And I've seen that when people approach their own development, somewhere along the ladder, there are those layers which are entitled economy, politics, and you reach them naturally. But if you try to jump at them, you'll probably just fall down at one point, or you'll have some kind of superficial understanding of, I hate communists. There's nothing to hate about communists. The same way as there's nothing to hate about liberals or Democrats. There's nothing to love or hate. This is a layer of perception, of understanding, of belonging that you reach at one point, building the blocks below it. This is inevitable. And it just reminded me that we very smoothly transferred from history, then to politics, then to poetry and art, and then back to history, then back to politics. So they're intermeshed, that they interconnect very freely. There's nothing human about it. This is no longer human business. They just exist as separate entities. So the entity of politics. you will reach it at one point. You will go, as
Yes.
Jordan Peterson says, the individuation of the hero. You will probably reach a meadow where there's,
Mm.
in a deep slumber, the creature politics something along the name of it, and
Yeah.
you will wake him up because you're already there,
Yeah.
and you will have a chat and you have a conversation.
Yeah.
So I think this is the natural way of doing things. And when anyone tells me I've graduated from university political science, and I'm always very cynical around that. I'm not, of course, I'm not denigrating people's efforts toward that, but
Yes.
just hearing that makes no sense to me. How
Mm.
can you graduate from political science? How can you graduate from human thought?
Yeah.
I've graduated master's degree in human thought. I've graduated master's degree in cognitive, visual cognitive perception.
Yeah.
I've graduated from human sight. My doctorate is human sight. There's some kind of sense to it, but from one point onwards, just nonsense.
Yeah.
Just crazy idea.
Yeah.
So those layers that I've mentioned probably belong to that same region.
Absolutely. I find myself, I know we're running out of time, but coming back to scale again as well, that, you know, the typical thing is that people will identify as if it were a singular unified place. I am a communist, or I am a free market liberal, or I am a neocon, or whatever. You know, take your pick. Throughout history, and the menu is broad but repetitive. But it doesn't seem to allow for the realities of scale. In other words, one might be able, I'm just making this up, by the way, it's not my own inner landscape as far as I'm aware, it's a Rorschach blot of something. One might be able to make a coherent argument for communism at a certain scale. So within this family, we behave according to communism, you know, from the oh gosh, mine's gone blank. The needs, from each according to his needs, yeah, to each according to his means, all of that stuff. It might make sense. It might operate effectively. It might strengthen connection and bond at that scale. But could that person not also, at the next scale up, be some kind of Democrat, or at the next scale up, some kind of, I don't know, like a figure from Machiavelli's Prince or something? That
Yes.
certain, to see them as entities, as you were describing, they have to have a niche. They have to have a particular scale, as I'm thinking of it right now, in which they operate most optimally. And if you misapply them at the wrong scale, you will have catastrophic results. So if you try and be a, you know, free market, kind of Ayn Randian kind of type in your own immediate family, you're going to have some pretty strange relationships. And if you have kids, they're going to grow up in a pretty distorted kind of framework, you know, where everything is a transaction with monetary value and cost and price. But I mean, I don't know, but I wonder, there may be a place within the city state, or the scale of the thing, that is an operative, at least possibly an operative system. Whereas, yeah, misapplied, it's disastrous, completely wrong, does huge amounts of harm. We're back to where we were before, about we were applying it to therapists needing a Hippocratic oath. It's not so dissimilar in the political realm, is it? That the reckoning with harm is at the center of that dilemma. Someone's going to get harmed, or metaphorically harmed, or more often literally harmed. Where to place the harm, where to place the benefit, at each of the levels that are important to make a kind of sustainable through time kind of entity, a body politic, as we might have said in another era. Yeah. Maybe that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, this
It could be a big
sounds.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, big one, definitely. Yeah.
Is that a good place for us to pause for today?
Yeah, I think so. This was on my mind anyways.
Yeah. Cool. We'll do this again soon.
Yeah, very soon.
Cheers, Martin.